If you're a Scrum Master, an Agile coach, and maybe you're out of a job, maybe you've been out of a job for a little while, and you see all these project manager positions, and you're looking at them wondering what are the differences, and you have a lot of questions, we're going to talk through that in this podcast.
Yep, this is the podcast for you, so stay tuned.
A couple podcasts ago, we had our favorite special mystery guest on, and Tricia, who's a product manager, and we talked to our favorite special mystery guest about why they should move from being a Scrum Master into being a product manager. And on that podcast, I made a statement that in the next maybe 5 to 10 years, I see the positions available to Scrum Masters and Agile coaches declining, and then it'll be much more difficult to get a job. So where are all those people going to go that are kind of getting pushed out? I mean, you and I know there's positions now that are labeled Scrum Master that when you actually read them, they're obviously a relabeled project manager. So maybe we'll talk about that too, but maybe some people are looking at project management and they don't know what the real difference is. They've never had actually sat down with a project manager to talk about, so maybe we'll work through some of that today.
Yeah, that sounds good. As a Scrum Master, when you think about a project manager role, assuming you've never been a project manager, before you even consider applying for a position like that, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For me, it's the word manager is in the title. So immediately you think this is a management type of role. Whereas Scrum Master, there's no word like manager in there. So immediately you start to think about, well, if this is a management role, what am I managing? Obviously the project, but what does that entail? And then you start looking into some of the things that you see in the job description when they talk about it. Assuming it's a legit job description and not one that's simply been copy-pasted, you'll see things like finances or budgeting, procurement, risk management. There are so many different things. What the project managers learn from PMI as project management techniques involve all these creation of all these plans, right? And so one such plan is the project management plan, which, believe it or not, most people simply take to mean the Gantt chart. But PMI differentiates. They say a project management plan is really a bundle of a bunch of different subsidiary plans, is the term they use, like resource management, time management, risk management, procurement, right? All of these little plans that they talk about, subsidiary, they all add up to what they call project management plan, of which, by the way, one little component is schedule. And that's what people often mistake for the project plan, i.e. a Gantt chart. That's just one component. So if you're a Scrum Master, that's the first thing to kind of get to grips with. You have to come up with all these plans, right? That's a lot more work than you anticipated probably, because as a Scrum Master, you didn't have to do that. And certainly at the very minimum, you as a Scrum Master are unlikely to have had to come up with a project budget. Chances are the budget was done by somebody else.
Well, there's going to be a lot of gaps, I would expect. So maybe we hit some of those gaps. Gaps, positive and negative, both. There'll be pros and cons in here that we can highlight in the spirit of Arguing Agile. I kind of wanted to dig into my off-the-cuff statement about the position being in decline, because I could, if we're in the spirit of Arguing Agile, let's dissect that for a second, because I did absolutely zero research. This is just my gut feeling, and then we said that in the podcast with Tricia, where Jessica challenged us, is like, well, you're not hearing any kind of signal. Like, what do you like? Where are you getting the numbers about position decline and stuff from? Like, are you just pulling it out of the air because that's what you feel? And Tricia's example was something along the lines of like, well, every company that I work at that's a small company, like somebody plays a role as Scrum Master. That only the biggest of big companies hire Scrum Masters. And then how many times do the big companies get it right, or where they're not actually looking for a project manager named Scrum Master so they can tick a box? They actually want to delegate that leadership to a team, and they bring on the correct type of position to do that. Like, so it wasn't looking good the more we dug into it. So we had a good back and forth on that podcast. So I guess the opening question is, do you think the positions are in decline? Do you think Scrum Master, Agile Coach are in different stages, or are they kind of the same? What do you think?
What I've seen lately is an elevation of the Scrum Master role into more of a team coach. So now, do you need an Agile coach? Because we have a Scrum Master and they're a team coach and they can coach. And then the Scrum Guide, the latest revision of it, said that the Scrum Master should coach the organization, the product people, etc. So then what's the Agile coach doing, right? So what I'm seeing is more Scrum Masters being asked to do what originally was in the realm of the Agile coaches domain, right? So that's what I'm seeing as a trend. However, I'm also speaking to these people day in, day out. I'm also seeing a struggle there because the Scrum Masters do not know how to coach the organization. You don't just simply get that one day because the Scrum Guide came out and said you should do that.
Yeah.
So I am seeing that. I'm also coming back to the original point about project management. I'm seeing some project managers come up and struggle on the empathy side, right, for teams and letting the teams become autonomous, come up with the how themselves. Because if you're a traditional project manager, you're used to creating a schedule for the team. You're used to creating what they call work breakdown packages. Yeah. So you take a piece of functionality, you say, this is what you're working on. So as a project manager, I would come to you, Brian, as a team member and say, hey, Brian, I've worked out a work breakdown package for you. Here's what it looks like. And you'll deliver this by the end of July.
Yeah.
And you look at me and say, are you crazy? You've never done this work before. There's no way it can be done by the end of July. And I have a ton of questions about it to begin with, right? In practice, what I'm seeing, though, this is interesting, this little bit next. What I'm seeing is project managers are starting to grapple with this because they read about Agile ways of working, Scrum, etc. And they're having a think about that and say, well, maybe I'm not the right person to come up with this stuff and dictate to the team. Sure. But what do I do instead? Because remember, they didn't get the Scrum Master training that Scrum Master would have gotten, right? PSM, CSM, whatever it is. They didn't get that necessarily. What happened instead is they were simply given a new title. Yeah. So in our new reorg, you, Mr. Project Manager, Miss Project Manager, you're now a Scrum Master. But don't worry, there's no pay cuts or anything, even though the word manager's gone from your title. That's a long way to say there's a real mishmash out there. So coming back to the original premise of a Scrum Master who's been out of work for a bit, should they consider, right? I think we're just starting to scratch the surface. You're going to run into these issues. And you need to kind of work through that for yourself because it's different for everyone. And see if being a project manager and all of the stuff that it entails, is that for you, right? Are you comfortable working out project finances? Are you comfortable dealing with all these subsidiary plans? Are you comfortable working with contractors, right? So if you're comfortable with all of those things, you'll be fine. If you're not, and you're more focused on letting the team build up and building trust and getting teams to perform their best, you may struggle a little. Yeah,
I kind of was thinking we'd go down this road on the podcast a little bit later, to be honest. Since you're here now, one of the reasons that I suggested that the position was in decline or not, which I'm not sure if I got your answer on that, is I think that there are some really, really great Scrum Masters out there. Like there are Scrum Masters that I watch do their work and move through the organization and build real solid ties with people. And I see them work, and because I'm me and I'm comparing myself to the way they work, I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm years away from like achieving that level of effectiveness as a Scrum Master that they can just like forge those interpersonal relationships and like shortcut a lot of the teams working together. And the type of Scrum Master that does like a large room facilitation where they are getting people up out of their chairs and moving around and getting people to laugh, and you know what I mean, by the end of the training or the end of the day or whatever, they come out a small group that is much stronger interpersonal ties as a group, right, because of the individual's facilitation skills that was facilitating the retrospective or planning session or whatever it was, right? So if you're going to draw down the market, let's say we have a 50% reduction in jobs over the next 10 years, even 50%. Okay, so like, what I'm thinking is those people who are absolutely excellent and have those strong facilitation and communication skills, what I think of is like the most advanced skill. It's going to be difficult to compete with people that have those skills. I mean, I guess you could say like, well, just learn to communicate better and learn how to be a people person. I guess like that's not useful. Like I bring that up because there was something you said earlier that made me think, hey, what makes you a really good project manager? Yeah, doesn't necessarily make you a really good Scrum Master, and then vice versa. You know, yes. And the opposite direction applies as well. So when you were talking, I was thinking to myself, boy, is it possible to take one of these project managers and then make them somehow develop some kind of curriculum or training or something that helps him adjust into being an excellent Scrum Master. Maybe they do some of the planning, because all the planning that you were talking about. We'll get into that a little bit later in this podcast. All that high level planning is useful. Planning like the 4-letter word plan, like the super deep low level planning to build all of the whatever, and then build all of this and build all of that and then ship nothing.
Right.
That 4-letter plan word, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about this high level stuff that connects you and your teams to the business via plans. The project managers know how to do that. The Scrum Masters generally don't know how to do that. But if there's a way I can teach somebody all those high level skills, all those planning skills, and then teach them the Scrum Master skill set as well. I don't know. Is there a path there? I don't know. That's kind of where I'm going. Because the type of person that needs a plan for every situation, it's going to be a bit of an adjustment to moving over into this world where you basically could be asked to operate with no plan.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if you're a traditional project manager moving into the Scrum Master realm, dealing with uncertainty and accepting levels of uncertainty, that's going to be a challenge for you because you're not used to that, right? You're used to planning things out, and then you're used to basically executing to that plan. So the unknowns, that's going to be the discomfort for somebody who comes from that direction, which someone going the other way is going to grapple with it differently, right? They're going to say, well, we don't need a plan, we'll figure it out as we go.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, maybe, but I think of I have to not think of like obstinate, like stereotypical project managers. I have to think of like the actual really good project managers that I have worked with who are communicating with external vendors and communicating with partners and partner organizations and stuff like that. They are very good at tracking things down and at setting expectations. So they would seek first to get all the expectations out onto the table, I would think. So maybe they would have a little easier time than Scrum Master going in the opposite direction. I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence about this one.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so let me give you an example. So one might be simple things like what does the customer need? Mm-hmm. So a Scrum Master would be more akin to saying, let's figure out what they need for now, for the next 2-3 sprints maybe, and we'll continue to refine that as we go forward. Yeah. That kind of mindset is harder for a traditional project manager because they're used to getting everything documented, PRDs, getting them signed off, things like that. There's a little adjustment there. I'm not saying it can't be done, it can't be overcome with the right training, but training's one thing, right? Shifting the mindset is another. So they have to accept that. And it's that uncertainty. Like the customer hasn't told me everything they need because they themselves may not know. Mm-hmm. And I'm okay with that. Mm-hmm. But I have just enough to be getting on with. That's just one example of where I think a traditional PM needs to adjust as they get toward becoming a Scrum Master.
So through the decline section, it sounds like Om is undecided. And I'm firmly in the camp of the positions being in decline. I could be convinced that you will still have Scrum Masters at probably the biggest organizations, and then SAFe, if you count SAFe as Agile. But Agile coaches, especially these people with really advanced facilitation skills that I was talking about, maybe they would all move into contracting, and you wouldn't have really permanent employee Agile coaches. They would just basically be pools of contractors that you would call up.
As needed. Yeah.
Maybe that's what it becomes. It becomes this temporary type of role, like management consultant type of deal. I don't know.
Yeah, just outsource that particular requirement. Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's possible.
Till McKinsey or whoever corners a market on that
and delivers their 70-page PowerPoint deck.
That's right. Did I tell you I went through a McKinsey presentation
recently?
Yeah, I went through a McKinsey presentation recently, and their slide deck was really it was a thing of art.
They're slick.
It was slick.
It wasn't the 7 S's by any chance, was it?
No, I can't remember what it was. Anyway,
the world of management consulting.
Okay, so at the top of the podcast, we said what are some of the differences that you could look out for if you're a Scrum Master? What might be missing from your experience, or what additional skills might you need to jump into project management?
I think the first thing that jumps to mind for me is project budgeting. If you're not familiar with basic accounting, you really need to get with that. Just You don't have to be an expert. We're not calling for CPAs here. Just simple, basic cost accounting, simple terms in finance. If you do that, I think you're setting yourself up for success as a project manager.
Yeah, we talk all the time that we're going to do an episode on budgeting and finance, software budgeting and finance. And you said cost accounting, but also in the back of my head is like it'd be nice if you knew about throughput accounting as well, and that you could show you could talk through the difference in an informed, if not in expert manner, at least in informed manner, to say like, hey, these are cost accounting is great. It's great. You got your inventory and your cost of goods or whatever, and that's fine. But also, wouldn't it be better if you had some indicators that were like not lagging? If you had a couple leading indicators, or if you could hone in your financials as close as today, so you can see a day to day in real time flow of money through your system. Wouldn't that be a little better? And then as you kind of seed that in your organization and they start asking questions, maybe they do a little research on their own and can come to it with their own expertise. But you're absolutely right. Tracking project costs, tracking expenses, ensuring that you stay within a particular budget. I would say a lot of Scrum Masters probably don't even have exposure to a P&L, let alone financial reporting, dealing with invoices, dealing with procurement, vendors and vendor tools, making choices of build versus buy, stuff like that. And I would say this is probably a reason why a lot of Agile transformations fail is you don't take this very important piece of the business into consideration.
Yeah, for Scrum Masters, this is something that requires a bit of effort on your part, but it's not unassailable by any stretch. I mean, you need basic accounting. You really don't need to be an expert in finance or anything, but you do need to know concepts like net present value, right, of your project. What is the value of $1 today versus 3 years from now when the project becomes reality? Those things are basic, but you need to understand them at least. You don't have to memorize the formula or anything like that. I mean, there's calculators available for you, but you do need to have the concepts down, and they can be learned. Mm-hmm. Just be aware that that's a gap, though, in your repertoire if you're coming in from the Scrum Master camp aspiring to be a project manager.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that you mentioned before we got into this category was the different levels of project planning, the different levels of planning. And like, again, people hear planning, they kind of like, whoa, we plan, we do what's it, just-in-time planning, right? Well, how do you do just-in-time planning when your business wants to engage in something brand new that they've never done before, and they are asking you like, well, how many people do you think we'll need for this, and how long do you think it'll take to spin this up? Like, how do you put any of that together as a Scrum Master when all of your like normal backlog management and any of that kind of stuff like is now failing you? Because none of this is handled in any of your trainings, and
right.
If you've only ever taken over teams that were already formed and you never had to put a team together from scratch to do something from scratch or build a product that didn't exist before, this may be a big hole in your experience. And a project manager has to know how to do this. They've got to be able to estimate a project scope, and they've got to be able to write detailed objectives and whatever the thing is before you write a project plan. It's like a primer.
Oh yeah, project charter and stuff
charter.
Like
yeah, that kind of stuff. Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, you've never done any of this before as a Scrum Master. You know that maybe your product people have done this stuff, but you certainly probably haven't. Certainly, probably.
I concur with that. I think the art of coming up with a project charter and the subtleties that go into it. If you're a Scrum Master, you may learn some of the techniques and then come up with, let's say, a charter that says this project will take this long and cost this amount of money. A savvy project manager, on the other hand, may have a slightly different take on that. I'm not talking about the numbers. Let's say the numbers are fine.
Yeah.
It's the presentation, right? So a seasoned PM, a project manager, might say this project might take between X and Y as opposed to this long, right? Or it may come in between X dollars and Y dollars, right? Set themselves up with a range to account for uncertainty and stuff they don't know, etc. Those subtleties, they come from experience largely. I mean, you read about them, yes. You do them the first time, you're probably not going to get it right, and then you try it again, right? So yeah, I agree with that. I think those are just some of the things that you need to grapple with. Day one, I mean, the project doesn't really kick off unless you have a charter.
Right.
You have to have that, which means you have to have your team already defined. You have to have scope defined because that's included in the charter. You have to have executive sponsorship. Those executives hopefully will kick off the project for you.
Right.
All of those things as a Scrum Master, you've never done that, typically.
Yeah.
Typically, somebody comes in and does that kind of outside of your repertoire, right? And then just say, well, here's the Scrum Master.
Yeah.
And, she's your Scrum Master team, go, right? Whereas as a project manager, you're putting all that together. Mm-hmm. You're actually arranging for the project sponsor to come in and kick off the project for you.
Yeah, and when you're, like I said, when you're a Scrum Master and you enter, like all of those activities have happened around you,
right?
And you've entered because of those activities. So if you're trying to make an organizational difference, maybe you don't realize that you're stuck in that financial box that is basically funding your whole whatever project or whatever it is, product. Like the opposite, the other side of this, like the pushback. We're not really pushing back against a lot of these concepts, just for the purposes of time and getting through it.
Yeah.
But the pushback side of this conversation is, if you truly are in a product organization, like the product management will be delegated these tasks and they'll carry it out. Like it's not like product management is delegating to a project manager. Hey, I work at Amazon. I got to launch this new Amazon Alexa. I'm going to go delegate to a project manager how to do all this stuff. It's like the leader in the business is forming a team. They're iterating. They're trying different things, figuring out what works in the market, and then the budget is following that. They're using much smaller, much faster methods. Some of this that we're talking about, I'm kind of skimming over, digging a little bit deeper into it, because I think the project management profession, I don't think project managers are going away at the same rate that Scrum Masters are going away.
I think, first of all, going back to this idea of the numbers of Scrum Masters, even / Agile coaches coming into a decline pattern, yeah, probably true. But it's seasonal. It's almost,
sure.
Right now that's probably true. But who knows what the future will bring. Mm-hmm. I do know that the project management role has been around for a very long time. Sure. Used to be one for many years. The switch over to Scrum Master from a project manager, something that I've personally done, I happen to think is slightly easier, especially if you have an open mindset, right? Yeah. Than the other way around, because the other way around, you're really grappling with the lack of hard skills, largely, assuming you have most of the soft skills as a Scrum Master. But hard skills, how to do cost budgeting, how to do these kinds of things, that's where you need to learn those, mm-hmm. right? And there's quite a few of those to learn. Like, for example, as a Scrum Master, you've been asked to raise risks, I'm sure. But in project management, you raise risks and you rank them. You rank the impact, the probability of these risks materializing, mitigation plans, all of that stuff.
You're tracking them all too, probably.
Right. And then you escalate those ones that need escalation, right? Mm-hmm. There's a subtle difference there, as opposed to just simply saying, yeah, I see a risk. Mm-hmm. And so those skills also you have to learn, mm-hmm. right? Translating risks and communicating them in the form that your stakeholders understand.
You're tracking and managing the risk, but you're not necessarily doing anything to mitigate any of them. I guess you are, in the form of you're tracking them and you're making sure that there are people in the organization that are dealing with them. You're not really, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like you're not necessarily causing the removal of risks. I've seen project managers do this. Like they have like sign-offs and stuff like that about like, well, you're accepting this risk and we're going to put it down in writing, and we're going to do a contract negotiation over working with people or whatever, and here we go, beat you over the head with the contract.
Well, so I think you make a good point there. Project managers have developed this skill to document risks, mm-hmm. right? They may not be actively removing those particular impediments.
It's not just risks. It's documentation there is a lot of documentation
for sure. Yeah, for sure. And there's accountability built into that as well. So if somebody is accepting a risk, then the project manager is going to document that and, as you said, get it signed off. Mm-hmm. They may suggest mitigation plans, but that's all they are, suggestions. They're not on the hook to actually action those. Right. What they are doing, though, is very adroitly assigning those risks to others to own, basically, mm-hmm. right? To say either solve that, accept it, or remove it, etc. and then they're just monitoring the process. But in doing so, they're documenting it such that everything can be pointed to somebody. Whereas Scrum Masters aren't necessarily going to that level of detail. They're simply escalating it, possibly on a risk board somewhere or a dashboard, and that's about the extent of it. So I think there's a bit more to it than just simply identifying and raising the risk. There's also classifying it, quantifying it, right? By saying, well, what's the probability this will happen? What is the impact if it should happen? Yeah. And then translating those probabilities and impacts into dollars. That's the key right there is say, if this risk happens, and here's the likelihood of it happening, here is the negative dollar amount impact on the project. Yeah. And then raising that to the stakeholders or leadership, possibly management, and just say, this is where we're at. Now, help us solve this.
Scrum Masters could get a big head start on that, though. I mean, if they are exposed to the run rate of their team, if they're exposed to P&Ls, if they're exposed to just the basic financials, they can do a lot of that stuff. They can project a lot of that stuff.
No doubt. I think the point that I'm trying to make is these skills are definitely not insurmountable or anything. Yeah. But oftentimes in practice, I don't see Scrum Masters privy to the finances like that. Or even, for that matter, run rates. Yeah. Right? That for some reason, those run rates are guarded like the secret that they're not supposed to be. So if you knew your run rate, which you really should know, by the way, right? What's the cost of a sprint? You should be able to tell people that without even thinking about it. But I don't really think that's the case out there.
I don't. It isn't, and I don't know why. But also, maybe there's another podcast for that. The other thing that we didn't talk about is, believe it or not, scaling is on the side of the project manager. I was trying to wiggle out of this of being on this side, but the project manager will just sit down and say, okay, well, here are some cutoffs. Once you have X number of people, you need another layer of management, and now I need assistant project manager or somebody else. Another team lead once I get over a certain number of development teams, and they'll just building block scale the whole project up, and that'll be the end of it. And that's how they will scale. I'm not saying that it's a very effective method of scaling. However, they have a system and it works, as opposed to when you start throwing teams at a Scrum Master, when they have 5 teams and they can't get anything done. Nobody thinks that's a problem,
Oftentimes, though, in those situations when Scrum Masters are kind of dealing with scaling, oftentimes what happens, I find, is that people will just throw a scaling framework at it. Sure, yeah. You need less, or Scrum you need safe, right? Now, I'm specifically talking about the Scrum Masters, right? And so whatever the vogue flavor of the month is, that's what they go with. This is now the way we scale, as opposed to your point. A project manager is going to go figure out everything based on the amount of work, right? Amount of work to be done, the number of team members, but the project manager might call them resources. I know that in some tools, there's resource sheets with resource sheet per hour rates and stuff like that. So they can figure all that stuff out, and they say, this is our run rate, this is what we need, here's the amount of work that we think we can do for the people that we have, we need this many people, all of that. Most of the time, it is a technique called straight line extrapolation, right? And it's not necessarily effective, but they know how to do it. Right, yeah. So as a Scrum Master, do you at least even know how to do that?
Yeah. Right. I think we've harped on the Scrum Master failings at this point enough. I think maybe we should, again, if someone's in this position and has decided to make this jump, take 5 minutes now to kind of highlight these are the things that you should be highlighting when you're looking to move. I mean, the scaling one, I'm only saying, like, project management, traditional project managers have to deal with it less as an issue, probably because they don't approach it the way Scrum Masters approach it, which is, this is a failing of the organization to properly decentralize and send leadership horizontal rather than verticals. The pyramid is not the answer. Right. A bigger pyramid is not the answer. That's the project management version, right, of scaling. But a bigger pyramid is not the answer. We know it's not going to work. You know what I mean? But how do we first convince the organization, and then once we've convinced the organization, how do we actually implement this horizontal descaled version of scaling? So again, I go back to what I said before, which is the good Scrum Masters with the good communication and facilitation skills will get with leadership and or management. They will figure out who has influence. They'll figure out who they have to talk to. They'll talk through the problems, or maybe the better version, pull the problems out of leadership by asking powerful questions, and getting leadership to kind of introspect where they want to go, and then driving the shape of the organization into the future based off of a plan that they put together. And then it'll be a much more powerful plan because they both work together to come to the answer, rather than me just telling you need to do whatever.
You bring up a good point, which I think is often overlooked, right? Which is, as a Scrum Master, you kind of work with your leadership. You coach the organization, right?
Yeah.
That kind of interaction, I don't see that with the traditional project management type of role. Mm-hmm. Most times, if you're a project manager, chances are you roll up under a PMO. So there are other project managers. Sure. There's PMO modus operandi tool sets that you have to use, and you cannot stray from that. But one such tool, there is no such tool as, here's an artifact, go engage leadership, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. That doesn't exist. So I think that's a failing, if you can call it that, between these two paradigms. Scrum Masters should be working and can easily be working with leadership, the organization, the other domains of the business, product being one of them, but other domains. Traditional Scrum project managers, they don't get to do that. They typically don't have the wherewithal to do that either, I would say, without being unkind, right? Because they're focused on the project. So that's one. The other thing is, Scrum Masters are more akin to take a product mindset, because they're dealing with product people, which is what really is needed. Whereas project managers, well, they're by definition thinking about things as a project. Everything has a beginning and an end, right? So they're thinking about everything from that perspective. Like, for example, we talked about this, but fund a project, as opposed to contrast that with fund a product. Right. Or product features or product capabilities, right? So stark differences there. So if you're a Scrum Master looking into becoming a project manager, just be aware of those things up front, and then do what you can to learn about how to redress those kinds of gaps or deficiencies, I guess. That might be chinks in your armor.
Project management from the perspective of delivering software, which is a little bit different than like a generalized kind of project management for everything kind of deal. It's like you're a specialist in software. Like, you're already a specialist in software. You're already kind of okay with ambiguity. You're already kind of okay taking on the unknowns and starting when all of the quote plans are not in place. Like, you're already okay getting started, and that's a strength. You probably have some level of facilitation skills. Kind of like I was talking about at the start of the podcast with being able to facilitate a large group and stuff like that. I'm not saying project managers can't do that. Project managers are probably well capable of this too, a lot that I've met anyway. But in terms of process facilitation, in terms of getting teams working together and sponsoring team collaboration and team empowerment, like not just empowering one team, but improving the ways that teams talk to and work with each other.
Right.
The glue that binds teams together, that might be an advantage that you have that you might want to highlight. And then adaptability, flexibility of being able to go from team to team and build different teams up and making them kind of permanent fixtures. That's that would be, in my mind, a failing of project management, is that you're not really seeing the team as something that is permanently powering a value stream of your organization. You're kind of seeing the team as like a temporary type of like, well, these people are just here until we hit this milestone or hit this deadline or hit this date or whatever, or deliver XYZ or whatever, and then we're going to hand off to this other team. Or especially with teams that I've seen, that like contract teams where they cut the team at the end of the contract period and they hand off, and there's like a hypercare period afterwards where they reduce the team to a certain amount and they just maintain, and then at some point they'll roll off too. It's like, well, how is the business going to maintain that software when all the people that wrote it and maintained it are completely gone because the contract is over, because the arbitrary end of date period has passed and now we can't maintain software? Come on, like, that's kind of ridiculous. So there's a lot of advantages here that we've outlined. There's a lot of gaps, to be completely honest, like a lot of gaps. I mean, you even said you thought it might be a little bit easier to move from project management over into Scrum Mastery. I guess where I want to move into is, should you make this move? Like, what would be, like, some of it's personality, some of it's where you're at in your career, some of it's training, other things you've been exposed to. But I don't know what would be some things that would make you suggest somebody look into this move, I guess.
Yeah, as we do that, I'd like to layer on another one, which is an advantage if you're coming from the Scrum Master side of things, which is hopefully you're used to speaking with customers. I've not met that many project managers that actually talk to customers. They don't really care, honestly, to be blunt, right? They don't. I mean, that's not their remit.
I think the pushback will be, well, they talk to vendors and they'll tell you they talk to
indirectly
customers, but maybe not. Maybe customers meaning like the people paying for the software or whatever, but not necessarily the end user.
Right.
Other than in case they have to play the role of a BA and gather requirements from an end user. But I agree with you. Like, it's not like the development team in their sprint review talking back and forth with a user as a user kind of navigates and uses the software, or a UI UX designer. A lot of project managers I've seen overcome this by having their organization or the PMO, wherever they're parked in the organization, also has BAs, and the BAs will partner with the project manager and relieve them of not having that skill set,
Yeah, by virtue of not having...
But now you got two people doing the job of... Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. And also not having those sprint reviews, because typically in project management you don't.
Yeah, right.
So let's talk about this. Should you consider a move toward project management? I think if you're the type of person who is very detail-oriented, who likes to be, on top of things when it comes to like ambiguity and things like that as much as possible, you also are okay with telling people as opposed to soliciting feedback largely. Again, this is gross generalization, mind you. You might consider that. But the overriding thing here is going to be you still act as a Scrum Master because that's who you are at core. Even if you land this role as a project manager, just be aware of what is expected of you in addition to being a Scrum Master. And that often I think is the case, right? People will say, you're a project manager, but we want you to work with the teams. We want you to talk to the customers, etc. If they even say that. But so just be aware. Should you consider it? I think the path going one way or the other, these paths are definitely things that these are traversable. You can do it. They're not insurmountable. Yeah. You just need to know what you're going in for, and then make a plan to come up with everything that you're basically lacking, for want of a better word, like budgeting, for instance, if you're coming from that perspective, right? I mean, these things can be learned as well. So partner with people is key, right? Partner with people, whether you're becoming a Scrum Master or you're from a project management background or vice versa. These people will be your key, right? So if you're in the PMO world, suddenly partner with those people that have more of an agile mindset in the PMO. Seek out a mentor.
I feel you're the best person to give suggestions of should you move. I don't have a lot of great suggestions about should you move, aside from where do you want your career to go. If you're just looking purely at money, I don't know. I think both these positions have ceilings, and I think the ceilings are very similar. I do think project management profession, I think there's probably more opportunities out there. There are certainly some sectors that are almost completely project management centric and absolutely not, whatever Scrum Master or, Agile-ish.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you're open for your career to take you in a direction that is away from mainly software and things like that, because that's where a lot of Scrum Masters play. If you're okay to go into, let's say, civil engineering or building bridges or whatever, I guess that's the same thing. But yeah, those kinds of projects that could be multi-year projects, nothing to do with software. Sure, go ahead. Get yourself into project management, and the opportunities are there. But if you're one of those people that say, in a couple of years, I want to maybe just move to a different area, product or agile coaching or whatever it might be, then the jump to those roles from being a project manager will be harder for you. So look at those things first and then make your decision, right? You could easily go up the ranks, so to speak, in project management, senior PM, director of PMO, etc. But you've got to want that, right?
I think after our conversation, I think I've made a decision. I'm going to stay in product. I'm not going to. Yeah.
Civil engineering didn't sway you?
No, not at all. Okay. No, I'm going to stay in product.
Well, to each their own. Yeah, I'm not moving either.
Okay.
I know the territory I came from.
Well, I'm glad that we went through this whole podcast and didn't convince either of us. Hopefully, we've also not convinced you, or we have convinced you.
Either way, you got your money's worth.
That's true.
This was worth every penny you didn't pay for. But let us know what else you'd like us to talk about. And please like and subscribe.
And you can go to arguingagile.com and fill out the form and send us a voicemail